Thank you. Can you guys hear me? You hear me all back there? No, you can't hear me? Wait, are you kidding or are you for real? Flip the switch. They gave me 2 of these things. I'm like, which one is? This one? Okay. There you go. Now can you hear me? All right, cool. Audio technical difficulties are solved. All right, let's put this back. All right, hey, well, thanks for coming. I know I got the after lunch special, so I'm going to try to entertain you guys, keep you guys awake and focused. But today I'm going to be talking about how you can take back control of your Security Operations Center, or SOC, as you all know, with risk-based alerting. You might hear me say RBA, just short for risk-based alerting. All right, so who am I? So my name is Billy Huang. I'm a practice lead for data analytics at GuidePoint Security. We have a booth out there, so if you guys want to come visit us and talk, we partner with Tynes, and we're between the raffle counter and the pick lock pick. So it's not hard to find us. So I currently live in Raleigh, North Carolina. Drove through the hurricane to get here, just to talk with you guys yesterday. But I'm a cybersecurity engineer by nature. I primarily work with Splunk, the SIEM, Splunk. But I also then ventured and started working with different security orchestration automation response tools, like Splunk SOAR, which is formerly called Phantom, and then also Tynes as well, so I got to give a shout out to them. And then I also spent quite a bit of time working insider threat detection as well, utilizing RBA. I did 9 years in the Army. I was in Air Defense Artillery, then went cyber for my last 3 years. And then I got out in 2019. I've been just doing primarily security since then. What do I do outside of work? I got 3 little boys, and I'm busy coaching them, breaking up fights, running around with them, doing soccer and baseball and things of that nature. All right, so this is a short lightning talk, so I'm going to try to power through these. I do want to do a demo in Splunk at the very end, so we'll try to save questions at the end if possible. But if you've got something pressing, just raise your hand. So traditionally, SOCs, they've got correlation searches that they built, or detections, and those detections create alerts. Now, these alerts, what we've seen is that in 40% of organizations, they're getting 10,000 alerts a day. This may not just be coming from their SIM, but it might be coming from their EDR solution, different solutions that are just pounding the SOC with alerts. And what I've seen is at least 50%, if not more, you're getting a lot of false positives. And so, you're chasing down these alerts. You're constantly, what we're seeing is, you're abandoning these alerts. Like when you pick up your phone and you get the same notification over and over from the app, you actually end up being blind to that, right? Because you see that notification so many times, you're blind. So people are abandoning their alerts. They've created them. They determine that they're horrible, and they're just forgetting about it. People are constantly tuning their searches. Tuning is the right thing to do, right? Because you want to make your searches more efficient, more accurate, but they're just spending so much time tuning. Then they're also creating suppressions and whitelists. So many suppressions that you may actually end up suppressing, true positives. So that's bad. And then also just a very noisy environment. So many of you guys might have heard we're getting a lot of alert fatigue in your SOC. So actually, before I go on, how many people here have played with Splunk? All right, so cool. A lot of people. Yeah, so just getting tons of alert fatigue, it's just busy and mundane work, right? So we got 2 problems that we want to try to solve. The first, how can security teams reduce alert fatigue while improving their overall security coverage, right? We want to decrease alerts, but we want to make our alerts better. Second is, how can security teams shift their triage and investigations to higher fidelity alerts? So now let's create higher fidelity alerts. Let's create only alerts that give us that meaningful and contextual information. All right, so let's introduce RBA. So now, right, we create correlation searches or detections. Now instead of having those give you a one-for-one alert, now we're sending all that to your risk index. So you guys all know what an index in Splunk is, right? Pretty much just a data repository, somewhere where you can organize your data and search efficiently in Splunk. So Now all of those alerts that we had that was pounding the SOC, instead of having alerts, let's shift all that information into a risk index, and let's store it all there. So in this scenario, we're going to be using Splunk Enterprise Security. Has anyone heard of ES, Splunk ES? So it's a premium app that you have to get on top of your Splunk. So you'll create another ES search head, and then that's got a lot of really cool like security configurations and stuff that you can do. All right. So now inside that risk index, we're going to add some extra contextual information. So the first thing, we're going to add a risk score. And the cool thing about this risk score is it's not just static. It's going to be very dynamic based on who the user or what NT hosts we're talking about. We're going to tie in the MITRE ATT&CK framework. We're going to add a tactic and a technique to each of these alerts. Next, we can also add any type of vulnerability data. You have a vulnerability system where you want to add something from the outside, like a third party. You can integrate that into your, each of your risk index events. Now, what we're going to do is this risk index holds an immense amount of contextual data. It's great data. Now we're going to formulate our alerts and notables based on the risk index. All right. So we've got two different things I want to talk about here. We've got risk rules, or RR. We've got risk indicator rules. So on the left side, you've got our old alerts. We're renaming them as risk rules. So you had an anomalous login rule or detection. Originally was an alert. Now we're just going to send that to the risk index. You've got data exfiltration data you want to put in there. All that really interesting stuff that may not be malicious in nature, we're going to put that to the risk index. Right? We don't want to get alerted on every single one of those. Right? For example, an account lockout. Right? That happens. Depending on how big your organization is, you might get hundreds of those account lockout event codes, and they may not be. 99% of the time, those are false positives. So we're going to shift that all into the risk index. Now we're going to create risk indicator rules, or RIRs, and that's going to look at all that data inside your risk index, and we're going to make the alerts from there. So a couple of the ones you can create right off the top of the right off the bat. Sorry, the first one is the risk score threshold exceed. So we can now say, hey, if a certain user or a certain NT host exceeds this particular risk score, now I want to get an alert. How about multiple attack tactics? Now maybe this particular user, they've done a certain number of things that have crossed over 2 or 3 different MITRE ATT&CK tactics, right? They went from detection to exfiltration to something else, right? So now we're interested in that. Maybe we can look at exfiltration in a certain sequence of events. This is really good for insider threat because let's say we want to look at a particular set of order. For example, someone plugs in a USB. Now they're requesting a permanent or a temporary exception to the rule to use that USB. Now we're seeing them actually exfiltrate, hundreds of megs or gigabytes to that USB, right? So now we see that particular sequence that we can alert on. All right, so key terminology. So risk rules and risk indicator rules, we talked about those. Risk object. So now that's going to be your point of interest inside the risk index. So this could be a username. This could be an IP address, an NT host, right? This is a particular unique point of interest that we have. The second is the risk object type. We're going to categorize these in 2 different types. We're going to call them an asset or an identity. An asset would be like a physical machine, a server, a computer. An identity is going to be associated with a user or an email. Now with enterprise security, you might hear asset identities a lot because you're going to configure that initially off the bat when you set up enterprise security. What you do with the asset identities is you're going to now say, hey, I see this particular asset. It may be a domain controller or some type of privileged server. That's going to have a priority level of, a critical priority level compared to a regular user host machine, right? Because that's going to be way more interesting than if we see something happening on a regular host machine. Just like an identity, if we see a particular user, like an admin user, a service account, a privileged user, that's going to be way more interesting than just a regular user. Now, I'm going to show this in another slide, but now you can actually set your risk score, and you can variate that based on the criticality level of your asset or identity. So going on, your risk score would be your assigned numerical value. So generally, the higher the risk score, the riskier. And then your threat object is an optional field that you can put in. A lot of times people will put specific IOCs in there. So if you see a hash or anything like that, you can actually say, hey, set this MD5 hash as into the hash field, and we can use that for threat hunting in the future. All right, so the benefits of risk scoring. So RBA gives you the ability to modify scores based on the criticality level of a specific asset or identity. So kind of like I was saying, your priority levels in the middle are critical, high, medium, low, and informational. On the left side here, you can see we're editing the risk factor editor inside ES. And this allows us to say, whenever I see a high priority user, I'm going to take that score and I'm going to multiply it by 1.25. So pretty much one particular correlation search that you create may not have the same score. So on the right side, you can see we have the risk analysis. This is an adaptive response action. So when you create a correlation search in Splunk, you can actually use this dropdown for setting the risk score, setting the risk object, and then all that gets then sent to your risk index. So you can see here, we've got a default risk score of 80. So anything that comes in here, that particular correlation search is going to give you a score of 80. Now let's say we find out that the person who wrote this malicious PowerShell process, maybe they had a user priority of high. So now we're going to take that 80 and we're going to multiply it by 1.25. We're going to get a higher score. Down here, you can see at the bottom we got threat object. So you're able to include the MD5 field is a hash. So you can include that into your risk index. All right, so how do you create a risk rule? Risk rule, a correlation search is very similar to a save search in Splunk Core. But in ES, you're going to create it as a correlation search. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to write your SPL, your Splunk search processing language. So that's going to be the base of your detection. Sometimes you're going to use just index equals and source type equals. You may use a tstats if your data models are configured correctly. A lot of times in ES, one of the things to configure ES is to set your data models and have those being whitelisted. So we're going to create the Splunk SPL. Next thing is we're going to choose a MITRE ATT&CK tactic and technique. So you can see down here. Yeah, there you go. You can see down here, MITRE ATT&CK, we're using the T1485. And I think that's for data destruction. That's the particular technique. Because this is looking for ransomware, so we're looking at data destruction. You can also use the CIS-20, you can use kill chain, you can use NIST. I primarily like to use MITRE ATT&CK. Next thing is you're going to schedule the search. So you're going to look up here, you're going to schedule it based on a cron schedule. You look at your earliest and latest time, that's going to be your time range. Then down here, you can actually configure the throttling. So throttling is going to tune out any duplicate events. Say you look back 60 minutes, now you're going to throttle and you're going to say, I don't want to look at anything within that 60 minutes. So you're going to be able to factor out duplicates. And the last thing is setting your adaptive response action. So that's going to be the risk analysis adaptive response action, which takes that, sets a risk score, and then sends all that information to your risk index. Now, how do you create a risk indicator rule? So risk indicator rule is also correlation search in ES. We name this one the attack tactic. Threshold exceeds for an object over the previous 7 days. So we're looking at a 7-day period, and we're checking to see if a particular risk object, so a user, an asset, and identity, if they cross over 3 different MITRE ATT&CK tactics. So here you can see we're using a tstats command. We're looking at the risk index data model, and we're saying, hey, let's check to see when a particular MITRE ATT&CK ID count is greater than or equal to 3. This one on the right side is actually looking at the risk score, if that's exceeded a certain threshold in the last 24 hours. So this one we actually set to be static. We're saying we're trying to see whenever a risk score for a risk object has exceeded 100 in the past 24 hours. Now, one thing to note is as you create more risk rules and you've got a lot more data in that contextual data in your risk index, your actual risk score, you may have to actually edit that. And so I've done things in the past where instead of having a static risk threshold, in this case it's 100, I actually will look at the risk index and I'm going to do some statistical standard deviation, and I'm going to see, hey, based on my environment, what is the average risk score amongst everybody? Now I'm going to do some standard deviation, and I'm going to say I want to look at the top 2.5% of the, when you do like a bell curve, you're going to look at that top, and you're going to look whenever someone exceeds that bell curve, we're going to now trigger an alert. So there's different ways to do this. You can create a static threshold, or you can do it dynamically by looking at your overall environment. All right, so after your risk indicator rule is created, all of that stuff actually gets sent to your notable index. So so index equals notable, that's where that stores all your alerts. And then you can actually see all that in the incident review page. That's the dashboard that a lot of the SOC analysts will utilize to check their alerts. They can assign them to themselves. They can then run drill downs and queries from the incident review page. All right, so other considerations. So the risk index is a great place to do preliminary threat hunting. So like you can look for IOCs. The data is organized in there, so it actually allows you to look over a long period of time. So anybody here, if you're looking at like firewall data or proxy data, if you start looking over 24 hours, right, your search becomes super slow because of just the quantity of events you have in the firewall or proxy index, right? So now all that data is in your risk index, all that interesting data. You can look back 30 days, 90 days. You can look for those low and slow attacks, and it's pretty neat. And then also, like I mentioned before, you can look for patterns or sequence of events. This is great. You can use a transaction command, and you can actually start looking at for that sequence of events. Another great thing is you can build dashboards to quickly see patterns and trends in your environment. So this one right here is your risk analysis dashboard. Great for SOC managers and management and stuff. They can start looking at their environment and seeing some of those trends. They can see if they're going up or down. They can see pie charts of different scoring and different MITRE ATT&CK or CIS-20 or NIST. The different frameworks where all of your alerts and detections are coming from. They can quickly see here like top risk objects, right? So you can see certain IP addresses and certain users, right? They bubble up to the top because they have the higher risk scores compared to other users. You can even look at most active sources. So these are your risk rules. You can see which ones are firing the most. Do I need to maybe tune them a little bit? Are these maybe not interesting to me? Maybe I can actually take them out. So you can see that over here. And then the second thing is the more risk rules you create, the more accurate your alerts actually become, right? So the more data you can populate into your risk index, just the better fidelity alerts that you'll have. That's really important. All right, so let's look inside Splunk. I'm going to do it in time. 10 minutes? OK, thanks. Uh-oh. There we go, OK. All right, so first thing I want to show you guys is, let's maximize this a little bit. First thing I want to show you guys is the assets and identities that I talked about. So here you can see we're looking at lookup assets. And by the way, sorry, this is a demo environment, so it's not actual production data. And so has anyone here done bots of the SOC? Yeah. So we're actually using bots version 4 data here. So you might see some interesting Splunk users here. So the first thing I wanted to show you here is our assets lookup. So let's go ahead and run this. All right, so you can see, so some of these NT hosts, right? We've got Acme 01 to 6. We've got different hosts. We set the priority level for each of these. Now this lookup is actually generated from, it can be generated from a CMDB database, right? So we take a CMD database, bring that data into Splunk, then we run a search that will then output the lookup to this lookup assets.csv, and we're going to assign a priority level to each of these. So we assign high to all of the Acames. We assign a critical to this particular one, 006, and we also check the category. So these are all PCI-related NT hosts. And you can see here, we got PCI virtual. These are all assigned mediums. And as we go down, we've got lows, and we've got different categories here. So same thing if we were to look at identities instead of assets. Okay. Very good. Okay. So if we sort this by priority level, now we can see particular assets that are critical versus high, medium, low here. So it's very important that when you configure ES, assets and identities have to be properly configured and tuned. Next thing I want to show you guys is the threat intelligence management. So if you were to come to configure data enrichment and come to threat intelligence management, this is where you can actually bring in third-party data. So in this case, we're bringing MITRE ATT&CK data, and we're grabbing it from GitHub. This actually gets updated every 24 hours. And so if there's new tactics or techniques, T numbers that get added, it's going to continuously update here. So then here, we actually take all that MITRE ATT&CK data, and we're going to put it into the MITRE ATT&CK lookup. Now here I'm searching for the particular tactic of discovery, but this is where you can see all the T numbers, right? So the tactic is discovery. We've got all the sub-techniques here and our T numbers here. So this is actually what allows you to, in your correlation search, assign a MITRE tactic and technique to your correlation search. All right. All right, so next, we're going to be looking at our risk index. Now, in this case, I'm using our data model because your risk index, if you accelerate it, you can put it into a data model. So the first thing you can do, I'm going to create a search where I'm going to look for just risk objects that have a high count of particular risk rules that have triggered. So in this case, if we sort by count, we can see that some of these have bubbled to the top. So this person, Fyodor at the SplunkShirtCompany.com, we've got Frothly, we've got particular IP addresses. And so these have all been, these are all particular risk objects that have a high number of risk rules triggered. Now, all right, so now I want to actually get a value of all the different search names that person has triggered. So in this case, you can see Frothly, they've detected 4 different AWS type logins to the console. Fyodor, they've done some type of malicious PowerShell process. There's been an unusual volume of outbound traffic. Just different searches that this particular person has triggered. Now, if we want to go a little bit deeper, now we can actually pull out the scores for these people. So in this case, we're going to look at the risk object type. We're going to look at their search name, their risk score, risk message, and all different things. So we're still sorting by count. So that's why Fyodor is at the top. But you can see that over the last 7 days, their sum risk score has been exceedingly high. This person has also triggered, I think, 6 distinct different searches, risk rules. These are all the different risk messages for them and different MITRE attacks. So you can see it's crossed, let's see. It's crossed over 4 different techniques and 4 different tactics right here. So if we want to actually do something else, we can actually do a distinct count. So let's say distinct count of MITRE attack right here. DC MITRE tactic. And now we can see here that it's triggered 4 distinct different MITRE tactics. All right, so the last thing I want to show you is the risk analysis dashboard. I had a screenshot in there, but as you can see, so we're looking over the past 7 days here. We can actually, we can say star for risk objects, so we can see all risk objects and all of the different searches and risk scores that everybody in your environment has populated. But you can also drill down to particular risk objects. So in this case, you can see that over the past 7 days, we've had an increase in 3 different distinct sources. So these are your different risk rules. You can see we've actually increased by 1 for a unique risk object. So this is interesting. And then here you can see we've got overall, we can see a trend line for different risk rules over time. We have our MITRE attack annotations here. So we've got different MITRE attack tactics and techniques. You can see we've got a large one in remote services here, as well as a data transfer size limit. Now, if you scroll down here, we can actually see some of our most recent data from our risk index. Okay, thanks. All right, so are there any questions? Yes, right there. Yep.
We did a couple things like use the SA investigator to kind of speed that up. But I was just wondering if you've got any other secrets that help like speed the investigation.
Yeah. So my suggestion there is take out all of those alerts that you originally had and just have that MITRE attack tactic exceed a certain threshold or the risk scores exceeding a certain threshold. And I've seen like you can set that notable in your incident review page. So when you drop that down and you look at that, you can actually see all the sub-risk rules in there. So it'll show you, and I can show you afterwards if you want to come down, but it'll show you the risk rules that you've triggered. It'll show you the different MITRE attack tactics and techniques. And then you can even drill down. So you can just drill down, click a hyperlink. It'll take you to your risk index, and it'll show you that data.
Thank you very much, Billy.
Yep, appreciate it.